Good evening. My name is John Shirley. I'm the director of the vendor program here at Lifestyles Unlimited. My job is to grow the vendor program to help meet all your real estate investor needs and to help you build your real estate investment team. And like many things in life, real estate investing is a team sport. Tonight I've got a great lineup of guest speakers. My first guest speaker is Bryan Dunklin with the law offices of Bryan Dunklin. Bryan's been in real estate law or practicing law for 31 years. Bryan, I know you've got a lot to say in a short period of time, so come on up.
Good, thank you. Appreciate you.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, very quickly, because it'll help me understand a few things. How many of you have not heard me speak before? Raise your hand, please. Wow, okay. How many have heard me speak before? Raise your hand. Okay. Yeah. How many people would not raise their hand no matter what question I ask? Let's see, I heard the joke the other day. Any of you believe in telekinesiology? Raise my hand. All right, I'm going to very quickly tell you a little bit about myself. I was on the faculty at SMU for 23 years, and I taught real estate law and real estate transactions. I was the chairman of the real property section of the Dallas Bar Association back in 2004, about 820 real estate lawyers. I'm a former general counsel of a national bank and former president and general counsel of a real estate brokerage syndication management firm, practicing law for more than 38 years, and I was a real estate broker in Texas for about 28 years. Got my degrees from SMU, and then they let me teach there. It's a little bit like the Woody Allen joke. I wouldn't want to belong to a club that would have somebody like me as a member, but they decided to let me teach there anyway. And anyway, I've been involved in SMU for a number of years. I speak on a regular basis to a large number of different organizations. I'll be speaking at the Advanced Real Estate Law course for the Texas Bar Association in July, and I've spoken here several times. But one of the first things I want to tell you is that I'm a lawyer, so I have to have a disclaimer. That's a law. You know, this law is constantly changing, so I can't. These are for general discussion purposes only, and no attorney-client relationship exists. And with respect to your specific circumstances, you need to contact a lawyer. And I will ask that no audio or video recording take place tonight, except for the one I'm doing myself, which you then are allowed to come get from me. So anyway, that's our disclaimer. If you want a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, there's a yellow pad that's going around, and I need your email address legible, please. I can't tell you how often we write down what we think your email address is, and then it comes back and says that that's not you. So if you'll sign up on the PowerPoint, you'll get a copy of my, on the yellow pad, you'll get a copy of my PowerPoint presentation. Now, I'm going to be talking about a lot of material tonight. There's a lot more material than I can possibly cover. And as a consequence, you're going to want the PowerPoint because it's going to make reference to a lot of information that I can't cover. But generally, I'm going to talk about a situation from the point of view of an investor, when the investor is buying, when it's renting, and when the investor is selling. And we're going to talk about fairly creative tools involved in that process and the limitations that some of the Texas investors have in using some of those tools that you would think should be within your power to contract. But in Texas, we aren't given the full right to contract as we see fit. So what do investors want? Well, they want to buy property and have the seller finance the purchase of the property. In the perfect world, boy, if you could get the seller to finance it rather than use debt from an institutional lender, you could get lower interest rates, better terms, no points, lower closing costs. That's one of the things that you ought to want. And you may want to keep the existing financing in place. It may have a lower interest rate or better terms than you can get in the market, and you may have lower costs of acquiring that if you could leave that debt in place. And you don't want to be sued if for some reason you can't pay the debt. Sounds like a wish list that isn't possible, but believe me, that is a possibility that is easily negotiated. Now, I like to tell the joke that I just signed a contract with NBC Studios to be the next host of The Tonight Show. Are you impressed?
Yeah.
Well, you ought to be. Now all I have to do is get NBC to sign. So it's all well and good for us to talk about what we want, but ultimately it's not just what we want, it's what we can get the other side to agree to. And so frequently one of the strategies that are discussed on a regular basis at Lifestyles Unlimited is to find people who need or who are highly motivated to sell their property, because it's under those circumstances that you can negotiate more likely what it is that you want. And then finally, you want to keep your costs down in acquiring property. So these are legitimate goals that we're going to talk about tonight. Now, when you're renting the property, what do you want? You want quality tenants. You want people who are motivated to take care of your property. You want them to be willing to pay more money than they might otherwise pay for rent, and you'd like to have them be in a position where they can buy your property at a premium down the road because they've taken care of it and made improvements, and you've motivated them properly to pay you on time. But if you can get that tenant to buy your property and you don't have to have other costs like real estate brokers and other fees, that would be one of your goals. And then finally, when you're selling, obviously you'd love to have a buyer that'll pay you a premium price, and if they can't pay cash, well, then you'd love for them to be able to go out and get their own financing. But if they can't buy, it would be nice if they're going to breach their contract for you to retain their earnest money and at least be in a position to hold their feet to the fire if they don't perform their contract. And then if you're going to be in a position where you have to carry the financing, the buyer's purchase of the property, then you want a buyer that you know has a history and a record of paying on time, etc. So we're going to be talking about these seller financing concepts in the context of buying property, in the context of renting property, in the context of selling property. Unfortunately, we have to deal with the state of Texas and our unique quirks in terms of statutory limitations on our ability to do that. So the solutions you might think would be to get a lease with an option. Now, by the way, you can use a lease with an option as an investor. There aren't any limits on you as an investor to use this vehicle. So think about it. There are three things that you want out of buying property. You want the use of the property, you want the ability to profit from the property if it goes up in value, and you want tax benefits, right? That's why you want property typically, is so that you can get the benefit of it. And by the way, the benefit of the use of the property can translate to rents and cash flow. So you don't have to own property to be able to get those benefits. You can get an option to purchase the property and sell your option and make a profit when the property's value goes up. You can even get capital gain from the sale of that option, and that's a tax benefit. So as an investor, it's a very, very shrewd strategy to use a lease coupled with an option. And by the way, the option is just exactly that. You don't have to buy the property. In today's world, there's a huge overhang on properties on the market right now for all the foreclosures, and who knows, values may in fact decline. We're still in an uncertain real estate and employment market, and you'd hate to go out and commit and buy a piece of property and find that it's going down in value. So wouldn't it perhaps be nicer to get an option to buy the property, rent it, and then turn around and sublease it, get cash flow, have the option to buy it, but if prices go down, ooh, I'm sure glad I didn't buy that property. So using that technique is a valuable investor tool. We have no limitations on that technique to speak of under Texas law. Contract for deed, a similar concept. Normally, you buy a piece of property and you get a deed. A contract for deed is a situation in which the deed is not delivered until the purchase price is finally paid. Now, most of the time from the perspective of a buyer, you don't want a contract for deed. There are all kinds of things that can go wrong if you don't get a deed. But it's at least legal for you in Texas to be involved as an investor in using a contract for deed to tie up and get control over property. Unfortunately, we got limitations going the other direction with a lease with an option with a contract for deed, and that's what we're going to talk about most when we start tonight. A land trust. How many people have heard about a land trust? Okay, I'm going to try to explain tonight what a land trust is and why it has limitations, or why I think it has some serious potential problems under Texas law. And then finally, we're going to talk about seller financing, both from the perspective of of buying property and from the perspective of selling property. And in seller financing, the seller gives a deed to the buyer, and the buyer gives the seller a promissory note. A note's just an IOU, indicating that they're going to make payments to the seller over time. And they're going to give a deed of trust, and that deed of trust is a vehicle by which the seller can foreclose if the payments aren't made. All right, first major statute that we're going to talk about tonight that's going to impose severe limitations on real estate investors in their strategies to deal with buyers and tenants is called the executory contract statute. And because I indicated in our promotion of this event tonight that we were going to talk about leases with an option, that's what I'm going to start with. Now, I as a lawyer think that you out there in the audience need more than just my opinion. You want to see how I've come up with my opinion. I want to explain to you what the statute says, what it doesn't say, and what limitations it imposes by virtue of the words that are in the statute. Now, most courts are going to interpret the words in accordance with their logical, obvious English meaning. And most statutes, for the most part, try to use the English language in an understandable way. This is an unbelievably convoluted statute. Sometimes we think we understand the words that we hear, and sometimes we don't really understand the words that we hear. I love the cartoon of the older woman, and she's sitting on the front porch and she's clutching a glass of wine. And she's looking in one direction, and her rather elderly husband is looking off in the distance in another direction, and out of the blue she says, "I love you so much, I can't live without you." And the husband looks over at her and says, "Is that you talking, or is that the wine talking?" And her response was, "That's me talking to the wine." So sometimes we don't necessarily understand the words that we hear. All right, this is a Texas statute that affects residential contracts for deed and a residential lease with an option to purchase. And it is found in the Texas Property Code under subchapter D of the executive contract for conveyance. This is where you find it in the Property Code. Now, if you haven't learned this technique yet, you want to learn it because it will save you a tremendous amount of money in legal fees. It's called Google. And what you do is you go to Google and you put in Texas statutes, and lo and behold, at the top of the list of unpaid websites is the Texas State Legislature's website for Texas statutes. And you go and you click on it, and it brings down a whole list of every code. And there's a property code. And then you click on sections. You can go to subchapter D and sections 5, and you'll find the executory contract statute. In addition to sending you the PowerPoint tonight, I'm going to send you the full text of the executory contract statute so you can see. But tonight, I don't have time to go through the entire statute.